and we will vote later on today. Now, the next point on today's agenda is Cameroon. We've got 5 sponsors of this resolution, and the first person to take the floor will be Mr. Tannock. The floor is yours, sir.
Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. The response in Cameroon to a number of internal and external threats to security is one of an increasingly authoritarian nature, with rights to free speech and assembly being severely curtailed currently. The arrests in January of the opposition leader Maurice Kamto and some 200 of his party activists in response to their protesting following the flawed presidential elections of 2018 is the latest incident of concern. Kamto remains in detention following charges of insurrection, rebellion and crimes against the nation. Whilst Cameroon has been an important regional partner in the fight against terrorism, particularly Boko Haram, which has been active in the far north region of the country since 2012, there are many concerns about the misuse of anti-terrorist legislation passed in 2014. Reports regarding the extrajudicial killing of allegedly former members of the terrorist organisation and the activities of vigilante groups suggest also that a growing number of innocent civilians are in danger of being targeted. Meanwhile, the government's response to the protests of its Anglophone majority in the northwest and southwest regions is also of grave concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Mr. Urban Crespo. Thank you very much, President. The armed forces in Cameroon have been accused of committing violations against the human rights of the civil population. They have also been accused of arbitrarily detaining protesters who are protesting irregularities during the last elections. In the English-speaking regions, the army has fired on unarmed people from a helicopter, causing tens of deaths. And European-made arms have also been used to execute people. There are videos that show that Cameroon soldiers have killed women and children just because they have been suspected of being part of Boko Haram. Member states such as Spain are selling arms to the country in spite of the fact that it is banned under the common position of the Council going back to 2008. But that has not been mentioned in the text. The European Union and its member states are actually providing military training and logistical aid as well as arms and military equipment for Cameroon. And this is something that has been suspended by countries such as the United States because of the flagrant violations of human rights that have been committed in Cameroon. We call on the European Union to stop any military advice and help and the sale of arms and equipment to Cameroon, because human rights then are simply words and they are not actually actions, and we cannot stand for that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Bardzo proszę, pani posłanka.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes.
Honourable High Representative, dear Chairman, even on this last day of a final plenary session of our mandate, we show our commitment to fight for justice and humane world. Today, this brings us to Cameroon. Numerous reports from human rights monitors have documented the excessive use of force by security forces and continued human rights violations against citizens. Several members of an opposition party, including its leader Maurice Kamto, and a large number of protesters and sympathizers are imprisoned. On top of that, the authorities of Cameroon have repeatedly restricted the freedom of expression by shutting down the internet and harassing and detaining journalists. These actions are fundamentally against the values and standards that we promote on the international scene. For that reason, dear colleagues, we as a European Parliament must act. We must call upon the authorities of Cameroon to immediately and unconditionally release all political opponents and any other citizens who had been detained solely for political purpose. We need to condemn the use of excessive force and violation of the freedom of expression and stress and request independent and transparent investigation into these violating actions. Looking at our own possibilities, the European Union can also make a difference. We should take advantage of the political leverage provided by the development aid programme to enhance and defend human rights in Cameroon. Additionally, the European Union should also consider providing technical assistance and political support based on our experience in other conflict regions and development programmes in order to assist the development of stronger democratic Cameroonian Cameroonian society. Dear colleagues, this motion works for a better future for all the Cameroon citizens and deserves all your support. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Ms. Sargentini. The floor is yours, madam.
Voorzitter, er waren verkiezingen.
Thank you very much. October 2018, there were elections in Cameroon and President Paul Biya was re-elected. But he's been in power since 1982. How is that possible? And it's not strange that there should be protests in the streets. And I believe that the core of our resolution today is that the Parliament says to Paul Biya, leave Maurice Kamto and his people free. Release them. Democratic protest is only to be expected in a democracy. Being taken to a military tribunal is not any kind of place for civilians. And there are countries where different languages are spoken, and we know about that in the European Union as well. And I believe that we don't often talk about Cameroon, but this is an opportunity for us to do just that. And power is in the hands of Paul Biya. He can bring about change. Thank you.
Mariette.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Ms. Schaake.
After the elections that have led to many questions in Cameroon, peaceful strikes and demonstrations escalated into violent clashes, and security forces were involved in serious human rights violations. Hundreds of people have died, hundreds of thousands are displaced, and activists have been rounded up and jailed. Now, oftentimes, anti-terror laws and heavy security measures are abused to justify these crackdowns. There have been cases of torture, forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. The freedom of expression is not respected, whether online or offline. So this is a very, very serious escalation. We urge the security forces in Cameroon to stop the use of this disproportionate violence and to respect the human rights of all its citizens. There need to be investigations into the allegations of excessive use of force and human rights violations, and it is very important that under the leadership of the African Union there will be peace talks that we as the European Union and all of our leaders need to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the S&D Group, the floor goes to Mr. López Aguilar.
President, Commissioner Mogherini, High Rep, as we all know, Paul Biya happens to be one of the longest time rulers of all Africa, competing with Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe and now only to Teodoro Obiang in Equatorial Guinea. 7th election leading to massive demonstrations against rigged elections. And Maurice Kamto, the leader of the Mouvement pour la Renaissance de Cameroun, was detained, now in prison, facing charges which could lead under military courts nothing less than life sentence or death penalty. So we urge, first of all, the stop of this violence and harassment and the bans against demonstrations. We urge credible, transparent and free election through electoral reform. We urge the European Union, along with the African Union and the United Nations, to exert a role of mediation in order to secure the release of not only Maurice Kamto, but also 200 political party followers which were also detained. And of course, we finally urge the European Union to take measures in order to scale down the level of cooperation with a country which does not behave democratically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Czarnecki for the ECR. Thank you very much, Chair. President. We are talking about Cameroon, which is a country a long way away from Europe. It's a country that was once a colony of one of the European Union member states. And therefore there is a moral obligation for us to be concerned about the country. Furthermore, we do provide a certain amount of humanitarian aid to that country. And so I think that we have the right to expect that when such aid is received, that country respects certain standards when it comes to human rights. And I think that our intervention on this matter should be a strong one of a unified one of solidarity, and only in that way will it be heard, both in Cameroon and in other African countries as well that we also deal with. And I think sometimes when it comes to the opposition, people don't remember that they have human rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Corral.
Thank you, President. And good morning, High Representative. Cameroon is facing several major challenges: Boko Haram in the north, problems in the east with the Central African Republic border as well, and others besides, and they deserve our solidarity. It's important that we repeat loud and clear that this threat cannot be countered by disproportionate use of violence and systematic violations of human rights. In particular, we condemn strongly torture, forced disappearances carried out by the secret services. And it's particularly serious when the public authorities is repressing legitimate dissents and preparing for the continuation in power of a ruler who has been there for decades. Closure of internet, prosecution of elected members of parliament, these are not legitimate ways of dealing with the major challenges which Cameroon certainly faces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For the ENF group, the floor goes to Ms. Bild.
Thank you very much, President. First of all, we should support the armed forces as well as the civil society in Cameroon for having resisted Boko Haram. And Cameroon has worked as part of a trans-Saharan partnership as well as in a multi-national force to fight Boko Haram, and it has taken in thousands of Nigerian refugees who are fleeing from Islamist barbarism. And for years, Cameroon has been criticized for this, whereas in actual fact it is a beacon of stability in a region which is being driven apart by many different forms of tension. First of all, there are tensions between the English and French-speaking communities, and throughout the Anglophone region, there are the largest reserves of hydrocarbons, and the public companies which control them are an avowed aim. And secondly, because efforts have been made by the Cameroon government to promote bilingualism and multiculturalism, and they have offered English-speaking facilities in the Supreme Court as well as in the national education system, and have trained bilingual teachers. Now, there is this split in Cameroonian society because there are few English speakers living in French-speaking territories and vice versa, whereas in actual fact they stand by the same values and love of the same homeland, and that is the Cameroon we should support without interfering in the country or being condescending towards them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Kienge. Thank you very much, President. Cameroon is falling into violence. The regime of Mr. Pobier is collapsing, and we have to... The way people are reacting is to trample on human rights. There's also been accusations of electoral fraud, and he is doing everything just to stay in power. And then the leader of the opposition are accused of all sorts. So the English-speaking part is in a situation of war, Boko Haram in the north. And in this theatre, there is the National Army fighting against militia and other forces, and we condemn the militia, but we've really got to understand what the real causes of this disaster in Cameroon are. And this is the immobilization of the government, gerontocracy, poor governance, flagrant electoral fraud, and all sorts of other issues. These are the problems behind. These are the issues behind the problems of the country, and we have got to try and find ways of solving the crisis rather than just organising elections where there is electoral fraud. We've got to have honest leaders there, and I would like to thank the High Representative for the work that she has done at a time where the egoism of member states has led to a rise of nationalism and populism. And I would like to thank my staff, all the interpreters and others. Every single one of them have helped me in some way. And I will do my best to carry on the work that I've been doing. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. Życzymy, żeby włoscy...
Thank you very much. Well, we wish you all the very best, and thank you for your kind words. Mr. Schaffhauser next.
Dear colleagues, this is my last address to the House, my last speech in Parliament. And I do this about a country which is dear to my heart, which I've travelled through extensively, and which I feel myself to be a son of. Cameroon is an ethnic, linguistic, religious mosaic, very fragile. Paul Biya perhaps went too far in the process of centralisation and fuelled resentment on the part of the Anglophone population in the West and Muslim separatism in the North. But the separatism has been engendered and instrumentalised by foreign forces. Paul Biya has been in power for 37 years. However, dear friends, 37 years of stability by comparison with other countries, it's not doing too badly, judged by that yardstick. He cannot monopolise power until his death. However, it's difficult to organise the succession. He knows that a process of democratic transition and decentralisation, together with a security and development plan, is essential. We have to help him in a discreet way and in an effective way. Therefore, let us avoid any meddling and interference with human rights fanfare and rhetoric when we apply double standards, depending on which African country and which of our interests is directly affected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now move on to the Catch the Eye procedure. Ms. Faria, please.
Wobec tego pan Jerzy Pospiszil. Is okay or?
Thank you very much, Chair. The debate that has taken place here, the debate today has precisely described the problems of Cameroon. What the European Commissions and our representatives could do is to increase the pressure on the current president, who's in power since 1984, and force the top people of the government in Cameroon to allow the opposition leader to stand as a candidate, not to keep imprisoning him just because he dared to stand against the current president. He should not be repressed. He should not be bullied like this. Unfortunately, that is the situation in Cameroon today. We cannot simply speak about any rule of law in Cameroon. It's here where we could carry out a lot of work, and I believe it would be a good thing, Commissioner, to convince the leadership of Cameroon not to imprison their opponents for life. That would be a huge success, and I agree with everything else that has been said. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Notis Marias, please.
Thank you very much, President. My speech today is going to be my last speech in this parliamentary term, and I hope that we'll see each other again in the next mandate, but of course that depends very much on the Greek citizens in my case and Greek voters in my case. And I hope very much I will be returned and be here when the Parliament resumes after elections. I have made more than 2,500 speeches here in this hemicycle over the time. And can I just say a word of thanks to colleagues, to the Presidency, you indeed, Mr. Presidency, and the interpreters, and all of the staff of the European Parliament, and take this opportunity to say that I will continue to fight for the legitimate interests of my Greek compatriots. And I believe that we must, in this case, support Cameroon, support democracy in this African country so that they can advance and so that the citizens can find the answers to their own problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Mr. Castaldo, the Vice President of the Parliament.
I'm sorry to say that the situation in Cameroon is reaching intolerable levels and is verging on a civil war. And the head of the opposition, Maurice Kamto, has been arrested for demonstrating peacefully, and he was protesting against the umpteenth re-election of Paul Biya in power since 1982. We're also seeing journalists and independent media being hounded. Terror is being spread across the country, and there has been bloody clashes in the northwest of the country between the forces of order and armed separatist groups. And that is why the forces are turning their attention to students who are demonstrating peacefully against the government. We must call on the Cameroon government to immediately release all political prisoners and initiate an inclusive, peaceful dialogue in order to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. And we need more diplomatic pressure on the country in order to safeguard human rights, and we simply cannot allow the Cotonou Agreement just to be something on paper.
Yes, please. Next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, President. I would like to highlight the fact that even this last day of our plenary sittings, we are talking about human rights protection, defending human rights. I believe that this is extremely important, that we send out a unified voice. I believe that this very clearly shows that we are united in this topic. I appreciate it highly. When talking about Cameroon, obviously killing, torturing, prosecution of people, killing people without fair trial, and so on and so on. This is unacceptable. And this has been done by the army forces representing the president, who has been in power since 1982. This is unacceptable for us, this trampling upon human rights. And even though we know that Cameroon is fighting Boko Haram, obviously, but we cannot turn a blind eye, especially in this pre-East.
Thank you very much. We finish with Catch the Eye with Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, President. What we hear is happening in Cameroon is terrible news, particularly as regards human rights. And in the case of the opposition being thrown into prison without cause, particularly Maurice Kamto. Therefore, it's clear that the security forces are acting against their own people. Many of them have been driven from their own homes, dispersed across Cameroon, as many as 500,000 of them, and 30,000 others have fled to Nigeria. Therefore, it's only right that we pressurize the authorities in Cameroon first to release Maurice Kamto and his companions, and then to establish democracy in the country. And in particular, that there would be free, independent media. Without that, we can't make a lot of progress. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. Ms. Šojdrová.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, this urgency very clearly outlines to the Cameroon government that the European Parliament is watching the situation there and does not agree with the excessive use of force, limiting human rights and democratic opposition there. The EU has diplomatic as well as financial tools that can be applied here, and they should be applied. I do trust that the High Representative is listening to as well as hearing our reservations in this regard, and she will react. Colleagues, at this point I'd like to thank all of you for your cooperation. For 5 years, on the Thursdays of our plenaries, we've been debating these urgencies, these human rights situations, and we kept calling for the release of prisoners. We were calling for the release of those persecuted for their political opinions or their ethnic origins. And I'd like to thank you for that. I do believe that it has been very meaningful, and that is why I will defend my mandate personally. And I'd like to thank all of those taking care of us here at the European Parliament. Thanks.
Pani Michaelo, życzymy sukcesu w wyborach.
Thank you very much. We wish you very well. Mr. Schroeder.
Just a few weeks ago, the Vice Governor of Tibet said that the human rights situation in Tibet is not just good, but very good. All ethnic groups in the region appreciate the Communist Party's work. They listen and follow the party. Apparently, Tibetans never had it any better, enjoying the fruits of fast-paced economic development. Thousands of police and military patrol the streets to ensure they get all the help they need, or perhaps to make sure that they do not accidentally set themselves on fire. But fortunately, it's not just the Tibetans who have it so good. The Uyghurs also enjoy all the benefits of the 21st century's most advanced artificial intelligence and digital surveillance technologies to make their lives easier and more comfortable. Arguably, they also have access to the world's most extensive lifelong learning system in dedicated education and training centres. By the same measures, we could confidentially say that the EU-China human rights dialogue is a successful instrument in promoting human rights and our values. I'm sorry I missed my speaking time due to technical problems. Thanks to listen to my previous China debate speech. It was my last speech after 11 years in the Parliament. Thanks a lot.
Dziękuję bardzo, tym bardziej przyjemnie.
Thank you very much. Choba, I am delighted to have been able to give you that opportunity. And then finally, Ms. Mogherini.
President, since the elections in Cameroon last October, we have witnessed tensions in the country, particularly in the so-called Anglophone regions, repression of demonstrations and the narrowing of the political space. Key opposition figures are under arrest. They face military trials. More than 100 protesters or sympathisers are facing prolonged detentions. Defence lawyers claim that Cameroon's own legal procedures are not being respected. A de facto ban has been imposed on marches and protests of the opposition, which is clearly not in line with the constitutional rights of Cameroonian citizens. We have been following the situation closely, constantly. On behalf of all the 28 member states, we've asked for the release of detainees against whom hard evidence cannot be produced, and we've asked for an immediate halt to violence, to human rights violations and hate speech. And I insist on this message today. I thank you for putting this important debate on the agenda on the last day of your mandate, to stress this message in a unified manner. Regarding the situation in the English-speaking regions of the northwest and southwest, we have consistently called for dialogue as the only way to achieve a sustainable solution in a non-violent and inclusive manner, respecting fundamental rights and the rule of law. Regrettably, unlawful killings and atrocities continue to be reported regularly, allegedly involving both the security and defence forces and separatist groups. The humanitarian consequences of this situation are alarming, with about 500,000 internally displaced people and over 32,000 refugees from Cameroon registered into Nigeria. We have raised our call for restraint and dialogue directly with the authorities of Cameroon. In particular, we are following closely the cases of the 47 Anglophone leaders that are in jail insisting on the need for a fair and transparent trial. These tensions add to the continuing attacks that some of you mentioned by Boko Haram in the far north, as well as in Chad, Niger and Nigeria. We know that Boko Haram is not invincible, that has suffered major setbacks, yet we are seeing civilian deaths and also losses by the security forces in Cameroon. Given that new refugees from Nigeria have lately arrived in the far north region of Cameroon, I wish to join the recent appeals from the UNHCR that the universal principle of non-refoulement has to be respected fully. These are the reasons why we need to continue our humanitarian support as part of the international humanitarian response on the different and various fronts. We consider both the internally displaced people and the refugees that are coming from Nigeria and the Central African Republic. If we consider that all together, there is about 1 million people in need of help, and I believe we have a humanitarian duty we need to respond to. This is something obviously we cannot forget when assessing our future support to the people of Cameroon. At the same time, we will continue to push for the respect of human rights in Cameroon and to ask to shed light on human rights violations fully. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo pani wiceprzewodniczącej.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mogherini. Please stay. We have another motion to debate. We